Hey, it's my nerd world. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and I'm glad that you are with the show again this week. Wasn't sure exactly what the show was going to be until I sat down and started hammering out the notes, and there's actually quite a bit to talk about. So, this week, this is what we'll cover. I want to talk a little bit of A New Hope. Not a lot, but a little bit of A New Hope. Galaxy's Edge, of course, has been open now for about a week. And I have some thoughts about older rumors with regard to films that may have been going into production that were canceled and how it might relate to Galaxy's Edge. Okay, the next date where we could get some new The Rise of Skywalker footage. Per a request on listener feedback, I'll talk a little bit about the prophecies that are inside of Master and Apprentice. And then we've got some new rumors, some kind of rumors / leaks that we'll dive into before we get into a very large listener feedback portion of the show this week. Quick programming note, and I'll talk a little bit about this after we get past the intro, but this show, My Nerd World, is expanding, or has expanded quite a bit, and I'll tell you what that means for you coming up. And as always, the show is brought to you by Embark, my science fiction sci-fi novel, which is available right now in paperback, ebook, Kindle Unlimited. I always forget to mention Kindle Unlimited. So if you got a Kindle and Kindle Unlimited and you're on the program, go and embark to read, because you're already paying for it, and it's a fun read. And also audiobook, and I'll have some details on that way later into the show. So let's go ahead and get started for this week of June. What is it, June 8th? Holy cow, this year is flying by, and it can't get here fast enough because I really want to go see The Rise of Skywalker.
We've passed on all we know. 1,000 generations live in you now. But this is your fight.
What you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you. Just let it in.
So glad you're with the show again this week. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and especially all the listener feedback that I get every single week. And look, it's because of that I have some really cool news for the show. And that is, the show has expanded. Without getting into too much detail, My Nerd World and A Star Wars Podcast are now part of a broader network of podcasts through Spreaker. And so My Nerd World and A Star Wars Podcast is now available as of right now on a bunch of different platforms, including Spotify, that it wasn't available on before. So if you've been finding the show through one avenue, but your primary avenue of listening to podcasts is something else that I haven't been on before, the likelihood now is that you can probably find me on anything. The Google Play, and like I said, Spotify, and there's a couple other new ones that are out there. Overcast, I think, as well, was one of them. But yeah, I got picked up. Really excited about this, by the way. I had somebody that actually discovered the show, looking for Star Wars shows to become a part of their program, and they stumbled across mine, and I just feel absolutely blessed at the fact that I've got the opportunity to expand the reach of the show and grow the audience even further. So what does that mean for you? Well, first off, if for whatever reason you're not getting the show the way you normally did, let me know in case there's a problem. But you will be hearing ads more consistently beyond me promoting my book on the show. So I would just encourage you that if you like the show and support the show beyond going and purchasing my book, if you haven't gone and done that already, please take a moment and go check out some of the fantastic sponsors that you hear throughout the program here on My Nerd World and a Star Wars podcast. This is really exciting for me. After doing this for a couple of years and it being a labor of love, it's nice that I'm going to be able to get a little bit in return now after all these efforts. It was never about that, but it certainly is cool, and this is a great way to expand the show and hopefully get some more listener feedback, although at this point in time I really need to start sort of cutting it down because I've been getting a lot as of late. And then one more quick thing, and just a thanks to you for those that not only have purchased my book, and I'll talk about that at the end of the show, but those that listen to the show every week and hear me talking about my book. Thank you so much for sitting through that and listening to the show. Selling books is hard, especially for a first-time author that doesn't have a full series out there. That's why I'm so desperate to get the second book out, which is still being edited, because I've heard that once the next book is out, and certainly the third book in a series, then the sales really grow exponentially after that, because people are more likely to purchase a book when you've got an entire series and not just by one author who's only written one book. I didn't hit number one last weekend. Thank you for your efforts, though. I did discount the book again this week, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. So let's start off here. And I like to open the show with just something kind of personal for me. And as I've talked about, I've got a movie routine on the weekend. I actually had I kind of have like a TV watching routine throughout the week. I'm kind of a creature of habit. So on Fridays and Saturday nights, depending on what our movie schedule is of going out to the theater, usually my wife Melinda and I will sit down and watch a movie when we have dinner, like at 5 o'clock. And sometimes the boys will join in, we'll all watch something together, and sometimes it'll just be Melinda and I. And then afterwards, sometimes we'll watch something else, or Melinda will watch a second movie with me, but often she'll head off to do other things because she's TV'd out, and it's kind of I get my viewing time, right? I get my personal movie choice. And that's when I struggle on what I want to watch, because I'm just so likely to go back to Star Wars, and I have such a huge movie collection. And that's my real unwind time as I head into the weekend, and I kind of treat Saturday night the same way. So I decided to watch A New Hope. And again, this is relatively speaking, right? With so many great choices of movies to watch, A New Hope doesn't really Star Wars movies to watch. Let me rephrase. With so many choices of Star Wars movies to watch, A New Hope doesn't initially like rise to the top. Empire Strikes Back does, and that's kind of where my head was at. I wanted to watch something a little old school. I wanted to get into some nostalgia. But when you've got so many fantastic choices from different decades, and such a wide variety of films now that we have to choose from as Star Wars fans, A New Hope, for me personally, doesn't, again, usually rise to the top of that list when I want to head into my weekend and be entertained by something. And yet, I decided on A New Hope, and I'm so glad that I did. It is incredible how such a simple, relatively simple, low budget, hastily crafted at the end film, right? How that movie, and with every next movie that gets released, becomes a more unique film. And it becomes, at least for me, even more treasured than it originally was. What George Lucas did with A New Hope, with such a limited budget, and if you've watched the Empire of Dreams documentary or gotten into the making of the film or listened to the commentary, I think most of us know kind of the story, but making A New Hope was a struggle. I mean, George he was still new as a filmmaker. And his first rough cut of the movie wasn't good. And I think only Steven Spielberg, of all of his friends that watched it, kind of got and understood what he was trying to do. And then he had to bring in these editors who were new to editing, who ended up winning their first Oscar because of A New Hope based on their editing. And they're the ones that really cut the film and put it together the way that it is. And it's amazing to me to go watch A New Hope and how still amazingly I'm using that word a lot, but it is still how entertaining it is. And how, with such limited means back in the 1970s, every frame is Star Wars. Every frame is unique, and everything in the frame is unique to this particular universe. There is no Star Wars without A New Hope. And every movie that comes out now, to me, adds to the richness of that original film. Because every single one of those films has a little bit of something from A New Hope. So it was just another one of those experiences of watching this film that I've seen hundreds of times, that I have memorized backwards and forwards. I could do it right now. I could just do the whole film. I've got that film memorized. How it still comes off as so much fun. And watching it through a lens of all the other material that is now around this film, prequel and sequel, it makes for an even more enjoyable experience, if that was even possible for a film that I do have memorized. And next week on the show, we're gonna play. There was another Vanity Fair video that came out that basically broke down the difference, in their opinion. It was Les Grossman again, I guess. The difference between the Lucasfilm original trilogy and the Disney, the George Lucas original trilogy and the Lucasfilm Disney films. Basically, it's the difference between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. So we're going to spend some time on that on next week's episode, which I'm really looking forward to. I was going to do it on this week's show, but based off of everything else that I want to get into this week, I just didn't have the time, so we'll save it for next week. I'll give you a bit of a preview. I have realized why I've really started to like Solo even more with every single viewing, and in my opinion, why Solo stands out from all of the newer films. It's because it's the one movie between The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Rogue One. It's the one film of those films that is the closest in line with the original trilogy in terms of storytelling. And again, I'll get into more detail of that next week. But when you look at A New Hope, it really is just a simple, straightforward adventure, coming-of-age movie that had this rich mythology sort of right there in the background that, of course, now, decades on, we've got all this entertainment because of. But it really was a straightforward sort of action movie. These are our heroes. This is the journey they're going on. These are their goals. And Solo, to me, fits that kind of simple storytelling as well. And I think of all the films, again, that Solo film is the one that's most closely aligned with A New Hope specifically. So again, we'll get into more of that last week. Let's dive into some of the news from this week and talk a little Galaxy's Edge while we're at it.
We have a spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
So now that people have had the opportunity to go visit Galaxy's Edge, which wasn't nearly as crowded as I would have expected for its first week, not a what's the word I'm looking for? There's nothing to that statement. It's just I've watched some live streaming videos of individuals walking through the park during the week, and because I'm usually home pretty early because of my talk radio job on Monday through Friday. And I was just really surprised at how it wasn't as jam-packed as I thought. And from what I hear from people on the ground in Southern California, a lot of people have actually been avoiding the parks because of what they expected would be a jam-packed Galaxy's Edge, and so the rest of the park has actually been pretty empty. But it sounds weird, but I'm a big fan of fake themed lands. I love Disneyland, I really do, but I love the theming. I love the handcrafted rocks that are made for, this is going to, if you've been to Disneyland, Big Thunder Mountain and Adventureland and Fantasyland. I just love that theming. I love being immersed in this world that's been created that takes you out of the real world. I mean, it's the closest thing you can get to walking into a movie, right? And having watched several HD walkthroughs of Galaxy's Edge, I can't wait to go there. It looks absolutely incredible. If you've had the opportunity and it's not being spoiled for you, because Melinda had asked me, she's like, this is not spoiling it for you? I mean, we're going to go to Galaxy's Edge eventually. Do you really want to watch all this stuff? I go, absolutely, I want to watch this stuff. The quality of the footage is so great on the big screen that I got that, it's like you're there. I mean, it's not like you're there, but it's like you're there. And seeing the level of detail that they put in and the authenticity to what they've done to Galaxy's Edge is absolutely incredible. I'd go just for the Last Jedi A-Wing they've got on display, for crying out loud. What I wouldn't kill to have that in my backyard. I scared the heck out of Melinda because I told her that if we ever go to purchase a house, sometime in the near future, that's one of my bucket list projects is to craft the backyard in that type of aesthetic to make it look and theme it otherworldly. I absolutely love that. So if you've had the opportunity and it's not being spoiled for you, go and check out some of those videos on YouTube. They are so entertaining. They really are. And it's absolutely, it's so special what they've created with Galaxy's Edge. And I personally can't wait to go. It reminded me, though, just a quick thought, and then we're going to move on to some announcements about Disney's D23 Expo coming up in August. But it reminded me of, there was a rumor that was out there. This was before the box office situation happened with Solo. There was a rumor, and I think MakingStarWars.net had reported on this. Maybe Star Wars Newsnet had done that as well. But there was a report that they were working on, or there was a script for some film that was based off of like the Mos Eisley Cantina. And that there was going to be a movie based around sort of the comings and goings of that particular cantina, and sort of spinning off for there. And it could be that was a part of what they were originally going to do with the Boba Fett movie that was greenlit, and then they took it off the schedule. That was way back in 2015, right? It could be that some of this got morphed into what The Mandalorian ended up being. It could be that whenever we get whatever Obi-Wan Kenobi, either film or TV series, that'll be part of it as well. I can't help but wonder, pure speculation, if there wasn't a plan from Disney and Lucasfilm for a movie centered around Galaxy's Edge. I'm wondering what role beyond the books and what we've seen already Galaxy's Edge is going to play into the larger Star Wars universe, because the fact that they created this Batuu, and I don't think we're going to get Batuu like I originally did in the Rise of Skywalker, just based off the fact that I know we've already got some planets. We've already got two new planets, that Kamiji and that Pisana, that suddenly now adding in Batuu just doesn't really fit anymore. So it makes me wonder what role Galaxy's Edge will end up playing in some of the content, especially either the animated or live action content in the future. Or if they just leave Batuu as Batuu and it's its own thing, like that is the movie. Like going to the park is as much of what you're going to get, because I know that everybody in the park kind of has their own story, and this is supposed to be, the timeline is that it's supposed to be centered around between episodes 8 and 9. At least I think I'm getting that right. If I'm not, I'm sure you'll go and correct me, either talkshownerd@gmail.com or dropping a comment on YouTube. And I think that's part of the reason why, my speculation, why they haven't opened up that second ride, that Rise of the Resistance ride. I think there's some story beats in that ride that relate to the Rise of Skywalker. So it just got me thinking with that other rumor, whether or not there may have been a movie planned around Galaxy's Edge, but they ended up pitching it off when they decided to sort of rework what the schedule, of films was going to be, based off of what happened with Solo. Now, speaking of the scheduling of films, one announcement that did come out this week, Disney's D23 Expo will be held in August, and I'm looking at the story version here from StarWarsNewsNet.com. They've confirmed the first look at upcoming projects, including The Mandalorian. This will be again August in Anaheim at D23. So we'll get some of the first looks of The Mandalorian, which means probably here that's when we'll get the official footage that was shown at Star Wars Celebration I imagine that's when we'll get that footage released to the public. While that is confirmed, the article here says, we also wonder if they will feature the Rise of Skywalker as well, being that D23 will be their last big event before the movie opens less than 4 months later. So the press release details go like this. On Friday afternoon at 3:30, and this is in August, the highly anticipated streaming service Disney Plus will give guests a first look at some of its original content, including Lady and the Tramp, The Mandalorian, High School Musical, the series. Fantastic name, by the way. And that's a joke. That's really long, but I'm sure that's what it's meant to be. And many more during the star-studded presentation. Walt Disney Studios will present a behind-the-scenes look at its blockbuster collection of upcoming films on Saturday, August 24th. Fans will see what's on the drawing board for the acclaimed filmmakers at Walt Disney Animation Studios and Pixar Animation Studios, and get a peek at an exciting slate of live-action projects from Disney to Marvel Studios to Star Wars. As always, attendees will be treated to exclusive footage, special guest appearances, and more. Okay, so I think the key detail is right here. Walt Disney Studios will present a behind-the-scenes look at its blockbuster collection of upcoming films. Normally, Disney goes to Comic-Con, and there's a big controversy with Comic-Con and Warner Brothers not going this year in San Diego and Hall H maybe being empty, and I don't want to get into all that right now because I just want to talk about Star Wars. But Star Wars used to go down to Comic-Con. Disney is now kind of competing with Comic-Con and doing D23, and now that they have all these properties, including 20th Century Fox, it kind of makes sense, right, that Disney would do their own thing because they've got enough properties right now where they can easily go and do their own yearly deal. But at Comic-Con is normally when we've gotten the behind-the-scenes video. So we get the teaser trailer, got that, and then usually around July we get the behind-the-scenes video. So I think we're going to be getting it a little bit later, and it'll be at D23 that we get that behind-the-scenes video, and that'll be the last thing that we get until we get to October and we get the full trailer with Monday Night Football, right? That's kind of the way that it goes. One question mark this week that I have now is that if you didn't hear, Entertainment Weekly is now going to Entertainment Monthly, and the guy Anthony Breznican, who writes for Star Wars with Entertainment Weekly, got let go. Not that they can't still report Star Wars, but my point is that I wonder what kind of effect that's going to have on the expose that's done every single year a new Star Wars movie comes out with Entertainment Weekly. So we can normally track when stuff is going to be released based off of past years' release schedules for the films. And they're fairly consistent, right? But this year, when it comes to Entertainment Weekly, I don't think we're going to be able to look at a particular date or week like we used to, because they're now going to monthly. I imagine that Entertainment Monthly will still do the write-up for Star Wars, or maybe they don't do it at all with Entertainment Weekly / monthly anymore, and Star Wars just handles it on their own. They've seemed to have ramped up their efforts, Lucasfilm and Disney, of releasing stuff to the public via the website. I know they've always done that, but it just seems like they've really increased doing that. And I wonder if they'll forego releasing it to a secondary publication, and Disney will just decide to release it on their own platforms, the details and the photographs and the write-ups they normally do. And to that, this weekend, we're going to be getting a Jedi Fallen Order gameplay reveal this weekend. And StarWars.com, which is what I've been referring to, has put up a couple of different articles about Jedi Fallen Order that are available. And I'm looking forward to seeing the gameplay. I love playing the games. Starfighter is my jam on Battlefront 1 and 2. Okay, that's my Fighter Squadron and Starfighter. They're both rad, and I could play the Battlefront 2 space battles for hours on end because I just enjoy it that much. But I am very much looking forward to Jedi Fallen Order. It looks really cool, and they put out a preview yesterday, a little teaser trailer for the trailer for the gameplay, and it looks really cool. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, and hopeful that it'll help pacify me as we wait for the Rise of Skywalker stuff. That's about it for the news this week. So any of your thoughts, of course, as we work throughout the show, you can go to YouTube and leave a comment there or email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. All right, let's move on to a request that I received from a previous listener feedback.
Fulfill your destiny.
So I have not read Master and Apprentice. I do plan to at some point in time, but just busy writing my own books and doing my other stuff, it just has not fit into my schedule. I do have the prophecies here in front of me that are in Master and Apprentice, written by Claudia Gray. I'm going to read them real quick and add a couple of comments. Not going to do a deep dive on it because there's one particular answer that I want before I start diving into what these prophecies could mean. But it goes like this. She who will be born to darkness will give birth to darkness. When the Kyber that is not Kyber shines forth, the time of the prophecy will be at hand. Now, I know that first one there is an easy one. You can look at Leia. And again, I'm not going to get into all the details. I just want to read the prophecies off first. On page 41, it says, one will ascend to the highest of the Jedi despite the foreboding of those who would serve with him. On page 93, it says, only through sacrifice of many Jedi will the Order cleanse the sin done to the nameless. The danger of the past is not past, but sleeps in an egg. When the egg cracks, it will threaten the galaxy entire. When the Force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. A chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him ultimate balance in the Force be restored. Seems pretty obvious. And then on page 133 it says this, he who learns to conquer death will through his greatest student live again. Is that really what that says? Because that seems awfully on the nose. Okay, so, and I pulled this from, actually let me do a quick search here. Sorry about that. I paused the show for a second. I just wanted to make sure the internet wasn't lying to me, which happens often. You got to do your due diligence, man. That's not aimed at anything in particular. It's more just me talking to me. No, so when it comes to these prophecies, I just wanted to make sure that this wasn't somebody messing around, because that last one, he who learns to conquer death will through his greatest student live again. Like, okay, that's got a lot of implications. So let me say this. Here's my question, and then if I can get an answer, maybe you can help me out. I haven't done the digging today. Maybe I will when the show is done. I was focusing on other aspects of the show that I wanted to cover, so maybe you can help me out here, and we can get into this on next week's show. And this was initially brought on by a listener feedback who said they wanted me to read the book and comment on it, but I haven't done that yet, but I wanted to bring up these prophecies because I know a lot of people are discussing them on other shows. So Claudia Gray wrote the book. Here's my question. Did Claudia Gray write these herself, or was she given these prophecies by the story group? Right? That's the biggest key to me. I want to imagine, right? Certainly if any of these relate to the Rise of Skywalker, they were probably given to Claudia Gray, and that was probably through a middle source like the story group. And that can go down any number of ways. The story group can say, hey, when you work on this book, it'd be great if you could include these prophecies as a way to leave, like, breadcrumbs, right, to future projects. Or did Claudia Gray write the prophecies based off of what she already knew, added some of her own, and then asked the story group if these were okay to go and include in the book? That's why I'm hesitant to really deep dive on these, because one, I don't think that while all the books are canon, I don't think there's a ton of crossover to connect everything as tightly as, say, they have with the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a lot of ways. With a book like Master and Apprentice, I mean, I don't know. I just want to know whether or not she wrote those or they were given to her. Because the way that I see it is, if they leave specific things in books that relate to the movies, that's going to be for the book reader and not for the movie watcher. And because of that, I don't know how much relevancy it'll have to the larger saga and the films that we discuss mostly on the show. So if this was just Claudia Gray extrapolating off of what she knows and then adding some of her own prophecies for fun, that's great. If these were handed to her by the story group, then we can really have some fun with it. I would love for these to be breadcrumbs for the future. I think that would be fantastic. Stuff for just the readers of the books to know, and then when these prophecies end up showing up in some way, shape, or form on the big screen or the TV screen, then as a book reader, you can go, oh, hey, I remember when Claudia Gray mentioned that in the book. And I really do think that would also help a lot when it comes to expanding the mythology, keeping the fandom involved, and looking for things. Because that's what Star Wars needs. That's my, not worry, but if I had any kind of concern about the Star Wars franchise, the Star Wars genre, it would be once the Rise of Skywalker is done and that gap that we have between the end of this year and then 2022 when we get the next movie, whatever that is supposed to be, as we talked about at length on last week's show, we're going to have a lot of content, Resistance, and then the next portion of the Clone Wars cartoon, and of course the Mandalorian, but none of that stuff is really deep into the mythology of the films, and so it's really important, in my opinion, for Disney to make sure that there is stuff out there that we as fans that listen to these shows and record these shows can focus on. So with that, if we know that this stuff was given to Claudia Gray, it's pretty inside baseball, but this stuff was given to Claudia Gray and will have some bearing and significance on future projects, then that makes for a much better discussion than spending a bunch of times looking at these prophecies when they may have just been the flying by the seat of their pants comments, writing a book that doesn't necessarily dispute anything of the larger storyline by the author themselves. So, again, if you have any idea of which category that falls into, it would be really helpful for next week's show. talkshownerd@gmail.com, and as always, you can leave a comment up on YouTube. All right, so let's get into some rumor mill stuff and some commentary, and maybe some stuff you haven't heard yet before we dive into listener feedback this week.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
That's just the worst. That's the worst. This is just the worst sounder to get into, like, the really juicy stuff of the podcast.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
Right? But I can't help but use it. All right, so let me go back to something I mentioned at the start of the show talking about A New Hope, right? You don't get Star Wars at all without having A New Hope. And watching A New Hope, that movie just has so much weight on it. It is the foundation of all of this stuff, right? The prequels came later, everything else came in. It's right there in the middle of this whole thing is A New Hope, okay? It laid the groundwork for us to go and get The Empire Strikes Back. And The Empire Strikes Back needed to be what it was. And George knew this. This is what so many franchises struggle with. You get a really, really good jumping off point. And I know this is a big argument when it comes to people who talk about the sequel trilogy being planned out or not being planned out, okay? And I don't necessarily want to go there because I love both of the films so far in the sequel trilogy, okay? But when you look at some franchises, and Pirates of the Caribbean comes to mind, certainly The Matrix comes to mind, and while those films are films that I enjoy, their sequels are films that I enjoy, I understand the criticism behind them as they progressively sort of go a different way. Transformers is another one. That first Transformers film was fantastic, and then you could see a lot of people will just bag on all the other ones that came afterwards. We were talking about giant sentient robots, for crying out loud. Anyway, George Lucas knew that The Empire Strikes Back had to be something different, and it had to go deeper, and was really wise in getting Irving Kershner, may he rest in peace, to go and direct that film and sort of guide it on its way. It also benefited from the limitations of its time, right? We've talked about that a lot. I think these films are a product of their time, but I also think that's what lent to a uniqueness to them, especially the in-world feel and the familiarity of something, a galaxy, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away that we can still all go and relate to. So the Empire Strikes Back needed to be what it was to keep the to keep the storyline going and the franchise going, right? And even then, I don't think they realized what they had. And then you get to Return of the Jedi, and Return of the Jedi was finishing up what came before, and we're going to have fun. It retreads a lot of A New Hope. And that's not a criticism, it just does. I read a fantastic article that was actually criticizing A New Hope, but it did make valid points of how the movie, it's funny. The movie opens very similar to, with the Star Destroyer coming across the screen, to A New Hope. You get another Death Star battle, right? And you've all heard this stuff before. But if anyone goes and says that The Force Awakens was an original trilogy retread, then I would just tell you, go look at Return of the Jedi and what that did. That movie was closing out that franchise, and we were going to have fun, and we were going to go and wrap it up at a time when the movies were obviously hugely successful, but I still don't even think that Lucasfilm even knew, or George Lucas knew what he had, even though it was hugely successful, and that all these years later, I would be 177 episodes into a Star Wars podcast, and there would be hundreds of other Star Wars podcasts out there talking about this stuff every single week. I look at the sequel trilogy very much in the same way, right? You don't get The Last Jedi, okay, for some of you, for good or bad, and we're going to get to that in listener feedback this week. You don't get to The Last Jedi, which I love and think is a masterpiece personally, okay, without having The Force Awakens too. The Force Awakens kind of stuck to an original trilogy formula. J.J. Abrams has said as much. You can watch the movie. You can see it's that way. You either like it for that or you don't like it for that, right? Okay. The Rise of Skywalker, that formula is... So it's kind of like this. The Force Awakens kind of stuck to the original trilogy formula. There's a formula sitting there, and then J.J. Abrams drank the formula, and he made the film. And it's a great film. Well, and then Rian Johnson decided, you know what? I've got my formula now. Oh, I spilled my formula on the table. It's still there. It's just all over the table now. Okay, so now he's got to figure out what he's going to do with the formula that's spilled all over the table of options, right? Okay, so The Rise of Skywalker, the formula, in my opinion, is going to be wiped up and thrown out the window. J.J. Abrams has said as much, that it was because of what Rian Johnson did that he felt that he could just go for it with The Rise of Skywalker. I think that The Rise of Skywalker is going to be like the J.J. Abrams Star Wars opus that, I don't want to say that he wanted, but I just think that The Force Awakens did show off J.J. Abrams' talents. Okay? It did show off what he's capable of. The Rise of Skywalker is going to be J.J. Abrams unleashed, showing everybody his true potential as a filmmaker. It's going to be, in my opinion, what The Last Jedi was to Rian Johnson, The Rise of Skywalker will be to J.J. Abrams. The Last Jedi has Rian Johnson's stamp all over it. The Force Awakens, not as much of the J.J. Abrams stamp. It's there, don't misunderstand, but it also adheres to the formula, and I think J.J. went, nah, man, we're going for it. So why do I bring all of this stuff up? I bring all of this stuff up because of some recent rumors. Okay, so here's one from Reddit. Take it for what you will. And that is, current rumors suggest that Kylo cannot kill Rey at the start of this film. So the Knights of Ren take him to reforge his mask so he can do what must be done, show no mercy. The Knights of Ren may have observed Kylo not being able to follow through on killing Rey twice, and there's a rumored twist that Kylo then asks Rey to kill him to vanquish Palpatine once and for all at the end of the second act. Okay? And there's some confusion here over the acts. All right, so getting back to J.J. Abrams throwing the formula out, the most compelling road for me is the one least expected by most. I'm sure that the detractors of The Last Jedi would disagree with me, but Rey and Kylo having a frenemy team-up going against the big bad, and thus somehow producing that resolution to Reylo that many of us look at. I mentioned this last week. That's the more compelling, and again, this is all subjective, just my opinion. not beholden to this. I'm fine with waiting to see whatever actually happened when we go and see the movie. That being said, the easy route, as I said last week, would be to wrap up the story with a balance of the Force involving Ben Solo and Rey. Ben Solo being, Kylo Ren being redeemed and Ben Solo rising, and the two of them, either Ben Solo sacrificing himself, right, and showing up as a Force ghost maybe, or just the two of them going on their separate ways at the end of this, and balance has been achieved, okay, after the ultimate evil has been taken down. The more compelling, and in my opinion, the deeper one would be that these two individuals in the midst of finding themselves find each other. And it's within finding each other and the dark and the light, taking on, in a frenemy way, the ultimate bad in the universe that's been doing this the whole time to bring about that balance. And at the end, we do get some version of that Reylo, of these two individuals finding that thing, that balance within one another. Is that going to be controversial for a handful of people? Certainly based off of many of the comments that I've gotten on YouTube on the negative side of things, that certainly will be the case. But which one is going to be the most enduring when it comes to closing out and satisfying when it comes to closing out this saga? I would argue it's the one that involves balance being achieved through some form of Reylo. Now, there was a licensing expo that showed a tall promo image. It was a display of Kylo in the mask. So it was basically a series of frames, tall frames, of the different Disney franchises. And then the one of them there, and I'm actually looking at it right now on my computer screen. It really is just it's just an image. It says Star Wars on the bottom, and then it's like from the waist up of Kylo Ren holding the trisaber in the helmet. Okay, and I know there is a lot of confusion about when does he put on the helmet and when doesn't he put on the helmet, okay? I think, and I know that J.J. Abrams' comments at Celebration push back against this, but I'm of the opinion that what we saw in the trailer, the Force flip, happens at the first part of the movie. You have that image of Finn and Poe on the rocks, and Finn is holding Rey's staff. I think they're all trying to draw in Kylo Ren in some way. MakingStarWars.net had made the comment that that they saw images of that TIE fighter downed, and there was also an image shown at Celebration of Kylo Ren looking like he stands on the desert. So that would be the Pisana location. And I know J.J. Abrams saw a picture of a forest planet at the beginning of the film and said that was the beginning of the film, and I'm not entirely convinced that he didn't not misspeak in that case. I think I worded that correctly. Okay, so when does he wear the mask? And all of this kind of reminds me of there was the Crate Lego set that came out, and the set photos that showed Rey on Crate, and I couldn't reconcile where that took place in the timeline of The Last Jedi based off the information we have. Okay, so here's my thoughts and speculation on this. Let's just say that this rumor of the reforging of the mask is to try to go and get Kylo to do what he needs to do. I love the idea of a thoroughly conflicted Kylo with a Ben wanting to come out. A Ben Solo on the inside, a Kylo Ren on the outside that knows he loves Rey, but he cannot reconcile those feelings. And he puts the mask back on to try to tap back into his dark side strength. It would be symbolic of so many masks that people use to cover up or pretend their problems don't exist or that they aren't who they said they are. There was that emblem that was put out by Loungefly, the pin that showed the stylized version of Rey and Kylo, a masked Kylo Ren, squaring off with their lightsabers against a background that had water on it. I know a lot of people have been posting to that photo from the Vanity Fair shoot of Kylo Ren and Rey standing on what I believe is the Death Star 2, not the Falcon. The caption under that photo says, "Photographed by Annie Leibovitz." Kylo Ren, Adam Driver, and Rey battle it out with lightsabers in a stormy confrontation. Their force connection, what Driver calls their maybe bond, will turn to run even deeper than previously revealed. Again, I think that's the Death Star 2. That image itself is not from the film. That's the point that I want to make. She took that pic, like the infamous one back from the Phantom Menace Vanity Fair shoot that showed Obi-Wan Kenobi squaring off against Darth Maul on Tatooine. She was there for those shoots, took that photo, but that exchange never happened. That was Qui-Gon Jinn. Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, here's what it all means. I don't put a lot of stock in that particular photo. The video attached to the Vanity Fair piece showed Daisy Ridley on that platform, water going off, and her getting ready to do battle. So clearly, if Annie Leibovitz took that photo, she was also on a different set other than the shoot in Wadi Rum in Jordan, that she was able to get that other stage set, because I don't think that stage was set up in Jordan. I'm pretty sure that was probably at Pinewood. Okay, so in all likelihood, there was a scene being shot that Annie Leibovitz took a photo of, but the Rey and Kylo portion of it and them squaring off was done specifically for the shoot. Because I'm not convinced, and I've mentioned this before, I'm not convinced this is the right word. I think there's a possibility that Kylo Ren heads into the end of this film frenemies with Rey to go and square off against whatever iteration we have of Palpatine, whether he's actually back in the flesh or whether it's like a possessed Matt Smith, and that he's using the helmet as a means to draw his dark side power out to battle this evil. And that it's in that confrontation that the helmet finally goes away. To me, that would explain why he doesn't have the helmet in the beginning, why the helmet gets reforged at some point in the film, and he goes and puts it back on. It may not necessarily be back on because he's trying to go further to the dark side, and maybe he's putting it back on because he wants to get the strength. And in terms of symbolism, it's a lot stronger at the end of this film, where a redeemed Ben Solo, if we're good with Ben-demption, occurs at the end after he battles with the bad guy with the helmet on. The helmet comes off as part of his redemption arc at the end of the film. Total pure speculation on my part. But what do you think? Leave me a comment, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or you can also leave one on YouTube. All right, I want to talk a bit about this just briefly, and then we're going to get into listener feedback this week. There was a lengthy post put up on makingstarwars.net about the rumor, the short version of the rumor that came out that Han Solo is in fact Rey's father, and the mother was not Leia Organa. That Leia and Han were estranged when she and Luke began Leia's training. When she did not complete that training, she returned to Han Solo, and their floundering relationship reconnected for a time, but Ben, knowing what happened, was troubled, acting out, and sent to train with Luke Skywalker. The rumor was not clear if Leia knew about Han's fling or the child. It also was not clear what Han even knows, or if Han knows the child he had on the side is Rey in The Force Awakens. However, the Pinewood rumors that they've heard over the last year make him think that Han and his best friend knew about the child the whole time. Okay, so the story group's Pablo Hidalgo debunked that rumor. I talked about it last week. MakingStarWars.net's Jason Ward said that he's heard two different rumors, okay, about Rey's parentage. And actually, on Jedi Council this week, it was weird. Ken Knapsack had a rumor that Rey's parentage may be explored in like a comic book. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't even know where he got it from. I haven't seen that. However, Pablo Hidalgo debunked that rumor, right, as we said. And Jason Ward said he'd heard two different rumors. He was going with the one that was probably less likely, and that was the Han and the sort of estranged child rumor, and saying that this may confirm the secondary rumor that he heard. What I think may have happened here with this particular rumor, because he makes a point, Jason Ward makes a point in this write-up. He says, I theorized in late 2014 on Now This Is Podcasting while breaking down the DL-44 Solo originally gave her in the conceptualized phase of the film. So in the conceptualized portion of the movie, originally Solo had given Rey his DL-44 blaster, and then that ended up changing to that other signature blaster that she has, which is now on her hip at the start of the trailer for the Rise of Skywalker, right? The silver one. So many details about the original intent of Abrams and Kasdan could be seen plain as day in those leaks. That said, the movie evolved, and Rian took it further based on what was left for him to play with. At the end of the day, I don't feel as if anything has been retconned. This is how the story evolved and what they wanted to make of it at the end. I think that this all may stem from an old rumor of what might have been planned in the first place. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in listener feedback, because several of you guys have brought up this point based off of the audio that I played on last week's show of Rian Johnson in that interview that he did with the Directors Guild and Spike Jonze, where he said that he was just a handing off of a baton. He was simply given the reins of the movie and read the script for The Force Awakens and was writing while The Force Awakens was being filmed. And he said that he didn't really have any points that he needed to go and hit. I tend to agree with many of the individuals. I think that there was probably a separate meeting that took place before he started writing, where the main arcs of the stories, of the character stories, were laid out. But he could just decide where he wanted to go. So this rumor of Rey and Han and him being the dad, I think this may have been something of, potentially this is what they had planned a long time ago. And maybe based off of some of the things that they've seen, that some of these insiders have seen of the Rise of Skywalker, it may have lent a little bit of credibility to that original plan years ago, especially given the fact that many of the people working on the Rise of Skywalker are exactly the same team that worked on The Force Awakens. So they may be extrapolating old rumors. But certainly the biggest thing to say here is that Pablo Hidalgo did say that based off of the timeline, this particular rumor doesn't work out. Let me get into one more here. And Jason Ward mentions this at the end of this particular article. Sort of a side note, the stuff with Leia we're hearing makes that moment in The Last Jedi where Leia flies through freezing space a little more palatable. It truly doesn't bother me, but it is the criticism I think is the fairest game. If we learn that Leia was in fact training with Luke for a time and has some abilities, it makes that moment, which already makes sense, I agree, make more sense to the potential detractors of the movie itself. That's pretty cool, and I never had a problem with Leia's Mary Poppins moment. I do remember, I'll never forget seeing it the first time in the theater, because I was like really stunned by what I was seeing. It elicited an emotion from me that I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to go and deal with at the time, because I didn't know how I felt about the time. But over time, I really do love it now. And I'll say this too. I'm really interested in sort of, I know interest is not the right word, but it does interest me the pushback on the last Jedi, and I do think the good art does that, right? Good art is divisive, and all this stuff is subjective. I don't think we'll ever see a circumstance of what happened with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I just don't think that Disney will put the films in a position where that can ever happen again, and that dynamic is going to completely go away once The Rise of Skywalker is out and this whole 9-movie saga is complete. And I say that because there was so much anticipation for The Force Awakens, and it did deliver, but it did deliver in kind of a safe way. And I know that that's debatable, okay, but it did. It is a great movie. It doesn't get too deep into the Force philosophy. It opens up a few doors, but doesn't answer those questions, okay? Kind of hits expectations about the formula that we discussed that JJ drank down. I have no problem with that. However, it did raise the anticipation level even more for Episode 9, in my opinion. Because The Force Awakens and the nature of what that movie needed to do and what it did do, it did leave a bunch of questions on the table that didn't necessarily get answered in the way that so many people had expected and didn't meet the expectations of what fans had in their head. I think a lot of people who don't like The Last Jedi, and I'm sure people will disagree, just my opinion, but I think a lot of people that don't like The Last Jedi only went and saw it once and didn't go back and revisit it. I have read comments from many people who said they did go and revisit it many times because they wanted to like it and they just couldn't. But I've also heard so many comments from people who walked out of that film kind of going, I don't know, didn't know what I saw. But upon going back and looking at it again, I really did come to appreciate it. And I know that was the case for me. When I walked out, I liked The Last Jedi, but every single viewing, I ended up just coming to adore and love that film. Side note, and then we're going to get to listener feedback. I watched, and I can't believe I waited this long, but I finally watched the video for the band LCD Sound System and their song Oh Baby that Rian Johnson cut about a year ago. If you like The Last Jedi and you haven't watched that yet, you need to go watch it. It's really, really cool. I watched it last night right before I went to bed, and again, I really like Rian Johnson as a person. I like his creative style. I've talked about how much I like the Last Jedi, but just as a non-Star Wars thing, go watch. It's like 5 minutes long, but it was just one of the better videos that I've seen in a long, long time, and it tells a really, within this short period of time with some great music, it tells a really cool story. And I would just definitely encourage you to go and check that out. All right, it is time to get to listener feedback. As always, you can email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and also find the show on YouTube and leave comments there as well. Let's go ahead and get into it for this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Shock Fitness writes this. We'll start off. I came across your pod about 3 weeks ago and immediately recommended it to my fellow Star Wars nerd friends. I find the show insightful and entertaining. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Shock Fitness. I greatly appreciate it. Maria writes this. My theory is that Palpatine's spirit is in Vader's helmet, and Ben has been talking to Palpatine this whole time, thinking it's Vader. I dig it. I dig it a lot. Shooting from the Hip guy says this. Full disclosure, I am not a fan of The Last Jedi. However, I don't think the amount of hate the movie receives is warranted. With that being said, listening to this interview, it's the one from last week, Ryan touched upon a part of my biggest issue with the movie. Ryan classified the movie as Rey's quest for identity. I would argue that her quest was wanting to be a part of a family. Maz even says the belonging you seek is not behind you, but it is ahead of you. We, the audience, were the ones asking who her parents were, not Rey the character. I never got the impression that Rey wanted to hurry up and get back to Jakku to see if she was part of some special lineage. She just didn't want to miss her parents returning. For me, this makes the two films feel disjointed, as Ryan sets out to answer the audience's question rather than the motivation of the character. Just my 2 cents. Shooting from the Hip guy, thank you so much for the comments, and let me use these comments to serve as an example of how this stuff is relative and it's all about perception, okay? Because I do disagree. First off, Rey's quest for identity, okay, I know he said that Rian Johnson said that, and I'm sure that's a part of what it was. I've also heard him say in many interviews how his goal for The Last Jedi was to put these characters through their paces. He wanted to bring them to the next level in this film. And so that's why Poe got the arc that he got. That's why Finn got the arc that he got. And Finn did. Right? It's so funny to me. I hear people talk about, I don't want to turn this into a defending of The Last Jedi, but I hear people talk about they spent an hour on Canto Bight. Canto Bight was barely 11 minutes. Just saying. And I love Finn's arc. And he ends up squaring off against Phasma. Anyway, okay. That's why you get the arc that even Rose had. And to a certain extent, Leia had. And certainly what Poe and Rey had. I'm sorry, not Poe. Kylo, Ben, and Rey. Okay. I would argue that her quest was wanting to be a part of a family. Maz says that the belonging you seek is behind you. It's ahead. We, the audience, were the ones asking who her parents were, not Rey the character. See, and I interpret that differently. At the beginning of the film, Rey talks about how she's talking to BB-8 about how I'm waiting here as well for my family. They'll be back. She talks about to Finn how she has to go back to Jakku, and I agree. She doesn't want to miss her parents returning, but I took that to mean she doesn't want to miss her parents returning because she wants to know truly who her parents are. She was left at such a young age, she doesn't know the background of her parents. So, to me, it's interchangeable. Yes, she's waiting for her parents to return. That's why she tells Han she doesn't want to become a part of his crew because she has to get back to Jakku. And it's only when Maz tells her that the belonging you seek is ahead of you she decides, okay, they're not coming back. I believe this person. Now I need the Force cave, the Force dark side cave on Octo to show me who my parents are, because she made the decision not to go back to Jakku, so waiting there was no longer an option. Again, that's just my 2 cents. All right, and thank you so much for the comment, and I appreciate that, and I respect your opinion of not liking the movie. Again, everybody is entitled to it, and I appreciate how cool you were about it, because a lot of people aren't, and I had to delete a lot of comments this week on YouTube. All right, Simone writes this. Hi, John. I just bought your audiobook and look forward to listening to it this week. Thanks for all your positive Star Wars content. It keeps me going, and I look forward to it every weekend. Thank you so much, Simone. I hope you enjoyed the audiobook. I'm in the process of recording the audiobook for the second book, and it in and of itself is as much work, and even sort of harder work than it was actually writing the book. Like, writing the book was the fun part. The audiobook is really tough to produce, and not an actor by any stretch. I feel like I kind of was successful with the audiobook. And as a reminder, you can go to Amazon.com to pick up the audiobook and the ebook and the paperback, and also Kindle Unlimited. And again, I'll talk about that at the end of the show this week. Kimmy writes this. Someone on another channel mentioned this channel, so I came to check it out, and I'm so glad that I did. Thank you for your positive Star Wars content. I subscribed, and I will keep coming back to hear more of what you have to share. Thank you. And again, please share the show with other people. And like I said, it's part of a broader network now, so I'm really excited to see how big the audience can get. It's fantastic. You guys come along for the ride every week. Baffled and Deranged, friend of the show, writes this. Hi, John. That's rumors for you. Once said, they do spread like wildfire, and this one in particular, Rey being Han's daughter, got a lot of feathers ruffled, among other things. Shame on the people who've done these things just to get attention. I'll always be a Reylo fan. I still believe Rey is a nobody who will eventually be somebody once Rey, Kylo/Ben seal their growing relationship. I like the direction that Rian Johnson took it. Romance? Yes! ! Pirates of the Caribbean are such radically fun movies. Yes, they are. You're funny when you talk about what little gray matter you have left in trying to figure out these trilogies. Wait until you hit my age 69, trying to keep it all intact. It's such a fun ride. Yeah, I think I'm going to slip into being senile really well. I really do. I think I'm almost halfway there. Always love your podcast. Thank you, Baffled. I do appreciate that. All right, Aunt Vesuvi. I was like, been there since the beginning. Friend of the show. For those naysayers who say there's no Star Wars in Galaxy's Edge, yeah, I couldn't believe what I was reading last week. It was ridiculous. Simply point to the life-size pilotable Millennium Falcon docked in the maintenance bay. And then point to the huggable, available for photo ops Chewbacca cast member walking around. And then take a sip of your blue bantha milk and smile. Yeah, I know. I'm right there. I'm right there with you. I can't wait to go. All right, Across the Stars writes this. I hear so many conflicting statements from the folks at Lucasfilm about there being an initial outline for this trilogy. It's a constant back and forth, and one of the main criticisms of this trilogy is that the story is all over the place because they're just making it up as they go along. Between that and the fact that Lucasfilm has sat back and allowed this fandom to tear each other apart over plot points that at this stage shouldn't even be a question. People are arguing over Rey's parentage. Are Rey and Kylo related? The whole thing is so darn tiring and frustrating. The paranoia over the spoilers, the deflection and misdirection of the marketing. I'm at the point where I'm just glad. I'll just be glad when it's over. I've been a Star Wars fan since '77, John, and I got to say, I've never been so exhausted with the fandom and the franchise. So, that was my long-winded take on Ryan's statement. LOL, great show as always. Bless you, brother. It is how you view it, right? You strip away Twitter and YouTube, and we don't have as many conversations as we have. I'm with you. I understand the frustration that you have. And again, I was a fan of Star Wars before I was a fan of anything. And that's why I love it so much. I know other people love it too, and people can love Star Wars and hate the sequel trilogy, and that's fine. But I just try to take all of it with a grain of salt, knowing people are talking about Star Wars because they care about Star Wars. And we live in a world where any Yahoo can give their opinion about anything, and then any, hack magazine-based type website looking to get clicks can go and post an article and clickbait somebody to it. It's just the world that we live in right now. And it's really you guys that listen to the show every week. It's looking at the download numbers, and it's the comments that you guys give me that, even those that don't like The Last Jedi, you guys, this is what Star Wars has always been about and what will always be about. And it's the fact that you guys go and listen to the show every week. It's not all the detractors, right? It's just not. Thank you across the stars. Zeeth writes this. Reylo is cool with me. Yo, Reylo is cool with me, man. Thank you, Zeeth. I appreciate that. All right. Winter in Bloom. Hi, John. I just wanted to tell you that I did order your book in paperback. I still love the feeling of having a book in my hands. Thank you so very much. I'm currently halfway through it. Brain fog has me reading slower than I used to, so sorry for not finishing up faster and commenting with the full review. The story has been really enjoyable so far, and I can't wait to read the whole series. Thank you so much. When you first announced the book, you had me at Flying Cars, a vehicle I always dreamed of owning. They really make the book fun. Yeah, thank you so much for that. This was my first, attempt at anything like any type of content creation of a story like this, right? I've always had just stories in my mind. I mean, we all did. I mean, I think, look, Embark is the manifestation of years and years of being a kid and playing with Star Wars toys and making up my own adventures. That's what it was. That's what this trilogy is for me. It is not Star Wars. I didn't want to make a Star Wars, but I wanted to capture the spirit of Star Wars, and I wanted to create a believable future Earth world, because I didn't want to do something set in a galaxy somewhere else, because George did that. And this story I crafted, the first book I crafted specifically thinking about A New Hope, and how do we make an epic space opera, right? Set the stage, what the first part of the book does, and kind of really give you probably too much detail, as some people have said. The second part of the book, it really takes off, and there's a reason for that, because the first part's all set up, for the most part. But then really go and try to, I want a simple story, good versus evil, and then get our, get our stories off and running so we can get into some other stuff in the sequel books. And that's what the first book was about. And I'm so thrilled with the response that it's been. And from what the beta readers have told me about Embark, Treasure in Darkness, Book 2, if you liked Embark, you're in for a real treat with the second book. So go get the first one. I did mark it down again this week, by the way. I'll mention that later. Even though I keep promoting it, and thank you for letting me. Let's see. When you first announced the book, you had me at Flying Cars. Let me get back to the Star Wars stuff. I'm sorry. Answering your question about whether or not there was a plan for the sequel trilogy, I don't believe for a second there was no plan at all from the beginning. Disney invested more money in Star Wars than we can fully wrap our heads around, and that kind of money doesn't get spent without some kind of plan and purpose. Disney probably knew that they couldn't continue Star Wars with a spiritless rehashing of the last two trilogies and still make their money back. Hence, they hired a very creative people and let them have some space. I would imagine the plan for the sequel trilogy was much like your writing plans. Okay, so I lost my place here. Hence, they hire creative people. I would imagine that the plan for Star Wars is much like your writing plans. A general direction? Yep. With lots of room for changing and moving details? Yep. If you think about it, this trilogy needed to be somewhat flexible, and Carrie Fisher's death proved that. If the plan had been too rigid for her death, it could have brought the whole thing down. It probably would have been impossible to finish things up without recasting or using a massive amount of CG to resurrect her that no one would have been fooled by. Look, it really could have just been as simple as, look, Kylo Ren and Rey are dual protagonists. This is what I think Rey's background is, but ultimately when we get to the third movie, we're going to have a redemption of Ben Solo in some way, shape, or form. Maybe there's a mention of Palpatine in the beginning, that he will be running things, but they'll handle that later on, and then they let Rian Johnson go with it. And look, I'm okay with it either way, because I love the product of what they've created so far. So I don't have it, And even if it was like they didn't have a purpose or plan, that's fine. They just took another individual's creative talent who just kept expanding on a story that was created beforehand. That's how life works, right? When I go out for a bike ride today, I know when I leave, I know the exact route I'm going to take. I know that I'm going to be listening to music and podcasts. I know the exact route, and I know that eventually I'm going to end up back at home. What happens between when I leave the driveway on my bike and when I get home? Who knows what I experience along the way, but I know the road that I'm going to be traveling. Okay. All right, let's get to Gaby. I've been listening to the show for quite a while now, and I love how positive and level-headed your insight is on all things Star Wars. You guys are so nice. About the sequel trilogy having no plan at all. I think there was an outline of the characters' fates, and it was up to the directors to craft the story on how to develop and get those characters from point A to point B. Because it is a bit constricting if there was an outline of events that needed to happen, yet was not consistent with the character's journey. Overall, I'm just really excited for the Rise of Skywalker and Star Wars content. Thank you, Gaby. Really appreciate that. Felicia. Hi, John. Let's see. I like a lot of your podcasts. I share your feeling about this negativity surrounding the Star Wars universe. I really don't get it at all. Why do people make these theories that disrespect the original characters so much? Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak for them. I can only speak for me. But thank you so much, Felicia, for the comment. All right, JW says, been a fan since 81. Don't remember seeing the first two movies in the theaters, but I was 9 when I saw Jedi in theaters, and I had all of the ships and figures and toys. We moved from San Diego to South Carolina, and my parents sold everything. And they ended up moving to Guam the next year. I cannot wait for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. It looks so freaking cool. I know I'm going to get goosebumps and tears when I go. I love all 3 of the trilogies, but this recording from Rian Johnson makes me mad hearing it, because there is so much contradiction between Ryan's comment there and what Disney and Lucasfilm has said in the last year, especially recently, about having it all planned out. How on earth can you go into a trilogy of movies and not have everything planned out? How could you not give your director guidelines or a synopsis of where the planning, of where the story is planning to go? As always, a great podcast, John. Look, and as we've stated throughout the commentary, this episode and previous episodes, I think there's room in there for the middle ground. Especially when, to what JW was saying about the recent comments. The recent comments about what was planned make a hell of a lot of sense. Why? Because J.J. Abrams is coming back to close the trilogy out. Those recent comments can all go back to the original production and writing of The Force Awakens. And simply conversations of, well, depending on where the other directors go, we can always bring Palpatine back into the mix. Palpatine can be the big bad in the background. That's what I would do, right? Well, that's a good idea. Maybe we'll talk about that with Rian Johnson or Colin Trevorrow, okay? I do think there's wiggle room in there. And my bike analogy works really well. Like if somebody asked me, do you have any kind of plan for your bike ride today? I think, no, I know where I'm going to go roughly, but I deviate quite a bit, and I take different trails depending on when I arrive at a certain point. I do. When I get into the park, I have to make a decision on which pathways I'm going to take. I've got like 5 different options. And the motivation for taking any option could be based on any number of things. How am I feeling? Do I want to get home faster? What music am I listening to? Am I up for a tougher ride right now? Do I just want to cruise? What do I feel like looking at today? Are my boys going to be going to the water park that's located inside of the park? And if so, I can ride on by and see how crowded it is. And all that stuff. It doesn't change the fact that I knew that I'm going to leave. I'm going to go there in the middle, and then I'm eventually going to come home. They all had to sit down at some point. And I don't think that there was ever all right, so this is The Force Awakens, this is our script. I'm not going to give you anything. You just go write what you want to do. No, I think there's middle ground there. And again, just to repeat, the comments that we've had recently about where the films have been going, I think all that goes back to J.J. Abrams. Because really, when you think about what Rian Johnson did, he didn't really upend anything. Right? That movie is a character film. It is about those characters. It wasn't about a super weapon, and it wasn't about a decisive victory over anybody. The Resistance got depleted. Our main characters all went through their trials and tribulations and came out a little bit differently. We established a further deep connection between Ben Solo and Rey. That's the biggest part of that movie. And we already know that is going to be explored even more in The Rise of Skywalker. Globe-trotting Tiffers writes this. My initial reaction after hearing Rian Johnson said What Rian Johnson said is that they trusted him enough as a storyteller and a writer to have that creative liberty and to pick up the baton and carry us through to the next part of the story. There were questions he needed to answer, like where is Luke? What drove him to leave? What is Leia going to do next? Rey and Kylo have this connection. What could I do to expand on that? I also think that they had a talented enough cast and crew to see the foreshadowing they put into the characters and the script they were given. Like Adam Driver playing a conflicted character and really driving his self-proclaimed mission of finishing what Darth Vader started, whatever the nuance of what that means. Hearing the clip of that interview actually means more to me, especially because of my love of The Last Jedi and seeing the story he crafted. I do wonder if Rian Johnson knew a little bit of what they had in mind for these characters to arc to characters, right? But I don't think that conflicts with what he said. But it could be overheard, kind of like what you're experiencing writing Embark. Thank you. And by the way, thanks guys for including that. I just, I tend to do the show very just genuinely, and I've mentioned this before. There's no editing in this. I sit down and I just go. I actually did more notes than I normally do, but I usually sit down. I have my bullet point of list of things that I want to talk about. I'm familiar with all the material because I just consume so much of it, and then I just go. And I do bring up the book writing a lot just because it's been such an eye-opener. It really has been an awakening to me to the creative process and has made me more familiar with not more familiar, but it's made me appreciate the creative process even more. And the fact that we're in the middle of getting ready for this last film and talking about it, and there's still so much discussion around The Last Jedi and what was known by who and when. It's been such a blessing to be able to have the experience of writing 2 novels, a quarter of a way into a third, because I'm about 20,000 words into the final trilogy of the final story of this trilogy that I'm creating. And I'm experiencing all of these things that I didn't expect, and I can only imagine that that's why so many of these trilogies flounder, like the ones I mentioned earlier, your Matrix and your Pirates of the Caribbean. While I love those movies, I know why people have problems with them, because the stories kept kind of expanding and growing and getting bigger. It's really, really hard not to do that when you've created a world. Especially when your instinctive reaction is that core story. Where do you go from there? Because that's your strongest story, is that first story. You kind of have an idea of where the other story is going to go, but it's that first story you go, oh yeah, that's the strong stuff. And now you've got to expand upon it. And how do you make the rest of it as good as the first part? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. When it comes to the original trilogy, they did. So far with the sequel trilogy, I believe that they did. But I certainly understand that creative process, and I just wanted to say thanks for bringing it up, because I really do appreciate it, and the fact you guys aren't getting sick of me talk about my book, because selling books is hard. It really, really is. Oh, man. Oh. All right. Tiffers goes on to say this. Personally, and keeping in mind this is coming from someone who did not watch or read anything from the expanded universe of Star Wars, I want to move forward in the timeline. I like what they've done so far, and I know I'll be excited to see what happens to the characters in Rise of Skywalker after the events from that film take place. Yeah, I tend to be with you. I love the idea of doing a Knights of the Old Republic, and I'll be down with that, but I really would like to move ahead in the timeline too. By the way, I keep forgetting, I'm so excited. They've done backward compatibility on the Knights of the Old Republic on the Xbox One. It's only $10. I'm going to download and start playing it again. I love playing that game. John Roop writes this. Absolutely hate the sequel trilogy so far, but I love your enthusiasm for Star Wars as a whole. I really like the show. John, thank you so much for that. It's a bummer you don't like the films, man, but to each their own, and the fact that you don't like them and you still listen to this show, I really, really do appreciate it. And you are entitled to your opinion and welcome to write me anytime. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I dig that. Christina writes this. In regard to the special meaning of the Vanity Fair covers, I saw a post on Tumblr that had the cover images positioned in a way that matched the 2 shadowy images that Rey saw in the mirror cave. You know, the 2 that came together and melted away to show Rey herself. I think that's intriguing. That is interesting. I will say this. I don't think there's anything extra to the mirror scene, only because I do like your theory, but Rian Johnson specifically said that he had that idea for the mirror theme long before he started writing the story. Now, that isn't to say that that wasn't inspired by the knowledge of what he knew, right? Because I've heard some people talk about how the mirror scene, if it were to turn out that Rey was a clone of some way, shape, or form, that mirror scene would be a revelation, seeing all the different Reys and then her seeing herself. By the way, let's go here I'm looking at the clock. I did not mean to go this long this week, but what are your thoughts if she were a clone? I'm not going to say a clone of who. Okay, we can leave that open. You can give your thoughts, right? Let's just say it doesn't conflict with Reylo, and that Rey is a clone in some way, shape, or form. Okay? How would you feel about that? Considering, because see, I had an idea for my stories that involved cloning, and I didn't go there, right? So this isn't spoiling anything if you're going to be reading my books or if you read Embark. But I did have this huge plot line involving cloning, and I didn't do it. And I didn't do it because, to me, cloning is so tough. That is such a tough one to do. Because I feel like a cloned somebody isn't looked at being as strong a character as somebody who's not cloned, or the original version, right? It's your Jango Fett to your clone troopers. I think they handled it really well in the prequels and in the Clone Wars, right? So it is a huge part of the Star Wars universe. So I guess my point is bringing cloning into the Rise of Skywalker would not be out of the norm. They even mentioned it in The Force Awakens. I'm just wondering what you think. How would you feel about that? And another quick point, and then we'll get through the rest of the listener feedback, but that promo poster that got released, that now, go back, when you get a chance, after you've gone to Amazon and Jon Justice and purchased my book for 99 cents for a friend, because you've already purchased it. Help me go number one. I'm trying again this weekend. You go back and look at that promo poster, that one that got leaked, that everybody was all in a hubbub about before we got the trailer. Those red troopers at the bottom of the page look like clone troopers. I'm still convinced that's part of a dark side army. I'm still convinced of that. All right, back to the listener feedback. Lucas writes this. I am in no way, shape, or form convinced that the Rise of Skywalker will actually be the last we will see of Kylo/Ben and Rey, no matter what they say. I tend to agree with you about that, Lucas. Hey, how would you guys like it if I did the whole show in ASMR? I won't. I promise I won't do that. That would be horrible. Can you imagine? Can you imagine listening to a Star Wars podcast in all ASMR? Well, the sad part is there's probably people that could. To each their own. Nihao writes this. Why do I feel like an ending with anything other than some sort of romantic connection between Rey and Kylo would be a missed opportunity in regards to storytelling? I believe anything less would feel quite anticlimactic. There's a lot to be said about that, and not a lot that I want to get into right now because of time, but we'll do this on next week's show. That Vanity Fair original trilogy versus prequel trilogy is really, really interesting. And it just talks about the difference of the generations of when the films are being made. And I'm not meaning this in a negative way. I'm using it more just sarcastically to try to express my point, and we'll get into it more on next week's show. But we live in a more woke time, okay? And as they, even not even necessarily from a standpoint of wanting to reach a particular audience, like saying going the Reylo romantic route to reach a female audience. Obviously, that wouldn't be the case. I'm a straight male. I'm a married straight male, and I love the idea of Reylo and a romantic connection being there. But it's not so much what Disney/Lucasfilm would want to do for the franchise, but what an individual like J.J. Abrams would want to do, living in the current times and reflecting on the current times. So I think that it is interesting to see what JJ ends up doing with just that in the back of my head. I trust that JJ is crafting the story based off of what he feels is the best storytelling and not based off of social events. However, you can't get away from the times that we live in and what's happening sort of in the zeitgeist, right? I'm using that correctly. That just happens. And like a really quick example, doing talk radio and working side by side with local news outlets, knowing the journalists and the anchors and the reporters personally, knowing their political affiliation, it's clear that when they're doing a story, even when it's not, when it's supposed to be straightforward storytelling, the bias gets in there, and there's no way to avoid it because we're just human beings. So I wonder how much of our current cultural climate came into the crafting of this particular story and what that means for the possibility of a romantic connection and how JJ goes and plays with that. All right. Like I said, I'll get into that more on next week's show. Friend of the show, Athea, says this. Thank you for being a beacon of positivity. Thank you so much. You're always so kind. I appreciate it. That's why I look forward to your show every week. And I ditto to what I just said a moment ago. You're great. Regarding the audio you played of Rian Johnson discussing his experience with directing The Last Jedi, I still hold fast to the thought that I believe that they had major story points they wanted to hit with the sequel trilogy, but how they exactly got there was up to the individual directors. Based off of what I heard from various interviews, I still believe that is the case. I agree with you that I think the sequel trilogy could be my favorite trilogy of the Skywalker saga, depending on how Episode 9 goes. I hope they do not leave the romance between Ben and Rey ambiguous. I am confident we are getting Ben-demption, and I believe we will see much more to make even the people that are on the fence about Kylo's redemption buy into it more. I am thinking we will see more about just how tortured he was by Snoke and how he abandoned his family. He really felt, since we didn't get much of that in TFA or TLJ. I think it's more apparent in the novelizations and other material, but not so much in the movies. I think we will possibly experience this with Rey through some sort of Force visions as she becomes even more sympathetic to his story, so will we. I think you're spot on when you say having an ambiguous romantic ending with Ben and Rey would be the brave and also most rewarding ending for the sequel trilogy and the Skywalker saga. It's like poetry. Where Anakin and Padme's romance fail, Ben and Rey will get it right. An unambiguous romantic ending. Excuse me, not ambiguous. An unambiguous romantic ending. It will give me hope that they will go this route based off what JJ said about being able to go places he wouldn't have before based on how Rian Johnson took the story in The Last Jedi. After all, I think we all deserve to see a happy ending to this entire 9-movie saga. It's Disney after all. They are the master of happy endings. And I think a lot of people, thank you so much for the comments, as always, Amy, I appreciate it. They can do anything in this film to change things up. I won't give any Dark Phoenix spoilers away. It was not a very good movie. But I had a huge issue with that film just based off of the motivation of Jean Grey herself and what exactly was driving that motivation. And again, I won't give anything away. But that being said, that movie was just incredibly meh. That being said, with Kylo Ren, there's a lot of ways they can handle Ben-demption and bring Rey together with Ben, depending on how they play on how influenced was he by Snoke, right? Did the killing of Snoke release him from that bond and his influence, right? You could handle that in The Crawl. Kylo Ren, having killed Snoke, is now dealing with the internal conflict worse than he ever had before between the darkness and the light, because it was really Snoke driving the dark side in him, and that's why he's so conflicted. I think there's something really interesting that can be done, and sort of a going the other way than what they did in The Force Awakens. And I'm just now kind of spitballing on this, but when you look at The Force Awakens and show me again, I feel it again, the pull to the light. Show me grandfather, and I'll finish what you started. Now, again, there's that whole idea that could all have been a setup, and we won't get into that right now. We'll just take it for face value. But what if it goes the other way in the Rise of Skywalker, and how he's dealing with those mixed emotions and what he's fighting? What is he fighting? The push or pull of the light or the push and pull of the dark side, right? I feel the darkness again. It's pulling me. Show me the light. Bring me out of it now that Snoke's gone. Just a thought. All right. Rocker Chick 27 writes this: in response to the part of the podcast referring to the clue on the cover of Vanity Fair, the title Rise of Skywalker is set much higher on Ben Solo's side than it is on Rey's. This was the most interesting and likely take I saw regarding the clue, in my opinion, of course. Thank you. Thanks, Grib, for the great show as usual. Thank you, Rocker. I appreciate the comment. Let's see. Is this the last one? I think it is the last one. Guitarded writes this: yeah, I totally agree. I absolutely love The Last Jedi. People are looking for things to hate these days. It's like sport. Thank you so much, Guitarded. And thank you so much to everybody who wrote in. I don't know how I do this every week. It's 90 minutes in. I was planning on doing 45 minutes and working through everything quickly. I should have known better. All right, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can also leave a comment up on YouTube. I did write, for those newer listeners to the show, a science fiction space opera called Embark. It is set in the future on Earth where flight culture has replaced car culture. Everybody has flying vehicles, and two corporations rule Earth, essentially. They were one corporation, and now they are two. They supply both the vehicles and the fuel necessary to make air and space flight possible for everybody. Our main hero, Taft Guardia, is in love with a girl who has not returned those affections. But he, with the girl that he loves, Keith Amaro, make a shocking discovery that sets them on a course of fighting for the future of humanity against a rising evil in the form of a corporate madman named Sin Argum, who has covertly developed a military and plans to take hold of the galaxy while the Earth faces an industrial apocalypse. There you go. You can go to Amazon.com and you can pick up the ebook for just 99 cents right now. MyNerdWorld.net makes it even easier. MyNerdWorld.net, that's the website. There's a ton of concept art from the book's covers. You can find out the storyline for the follow-up book, Treasure in Darkness, there, and the cover art for that book, which comes out in the next couple of months. You can purchase Embark from MyNerdWorld.net. It'll take you over to the Amazon page, and also all the podcasts are available there as well, and there's a bunch of other stuff. So, MyNerdWorld.net, but if you go to Amazon.com and search Jon Justice, the ebook is 99 cents, the paperback is $11.99. That gets you the ebook for free. So, if you purchase the paperback, when you go to purchase the paperback, you'll see at point of purchase where it asks you if you want a free ebook. You can go ahead and get a free ebook. And the purchase of either of those gets you the audiobook, which is it's 11 and a half hours long, produced and read by me. It gets you the audiobook for just $7.50. So that's 12 hours, almost 12 hours of content for just $7.50 for the purchase of one or the other. Amazon lets you put the books into certain categories, and I have the book in a young adult science fiction category. It's not necessarily a young adult book. It is friendly for all ages. I've had people in their 60s and 70s say how much they actually enjoyed it, and my son Kyle, his 12-year-old, has read it, and he loved it as well. That was my goal, was to craft a story that both young and old would love, and it's filled with a lot of pop culture references. I wrote it in the middle of when I was it was pre and post The Last Jedi, and also Ready Player One was a big inspiration on this book when it comes to the camaraderie of the friends and injecting some of my own personal pop culture references and what I love. So it was a labor of love, and it's been a fantastic experience. So go on by Amazon, pick up the book. That category I was talking about is the one that I've been trying to go number one in, and I think I got up to 20 last week just based off of a few sales. So if I got like 20 sales this weekend, I could probably go number one. That's only important because I want to be able to promote the second book when it comes out, and the third one later this year when the trilogy is done, by saying the number one ranked bestseller. And the only way I can do that is if I hit number one in the category. And the best category that I can hit number one in is that young adult science fiction space opera category. So if you haven't purchased the book, go to Amazon.com. Get it this weekend at a discounted price. If you have, thank you as always. And thank you for letting me promote the book on the show as well. I really do appreciate it, because as I keep saying, selling books is hard. And I really think that you'll like the story if you haven't picked it up yet. If you're not a reader, my last little pitch, I'm not a reader. I don't read books. I write them, but I don't read them. I write books for people who love movies. That's what this book is. And I think anybody who's read the book can attest to that. It really does play out in the way that the book is written and the way I wrote it in the descriptions. It is written to play out in your mind's eye like a film. So I write books for people who love movies. All right, I'm done with my pitch. Thank you so much for checking the show out. I really do appreciate it. You guys are the best. And I will talk to you again next week.
The Force will be with you. Always.
My nerd world.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?